Have you ever had a moment that completely changed your life? A chance encounter that broke down all your walls? If you're settling in for this story, prepare for an emotional journey that might just change how you see the world. Before we begin, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if heartfelt stories about real human connections speak to your soul. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives that remind us we're never truly alone in our struggles. The restaurant's ambient lighting cast a warm glow across the polished wooden tables. Jake Matthews fidgeted with his watch, a modest timepiece that had belonged to his father, as he waited for his blind date to arrive. At 34, he hadn't been on a proper date in nearly 3 years, not since Emily's mother had walked out, leaving him to raise their 7-year-old daughter alone. Just one more minute, he muttered to himself, checking his phone again for any cancellation message. His sister Megan had arranged this date, insisting he needed to rejoin the land of the living. Jake had reluctantly agreed, but only after securing his trusted neighbor Mrs. Gonzalez as a babysitter for the evening. The restaurant door swung open, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. A woman in a tailored charcoal suit entered, her confident stride faltering as she scanned the room. Even from across the restaurant, he could see she was stunning, dark hair pulled into an elegant twist, high cheekbones, and the unmistakable posture of someone accustomed to commanding attention. This had to be Alexandra Rivera, his blind date and, unbeknownst to her, the recently appointed CEO of the marketing firm where he worked as a mid-level graphic designer. Jake stood, raising his hand in an awkward half-wave. Their eyes met, and recognition flickered across her face. For a brief moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing something like panic before she composed herself and approached his table. "Jake? I'm Alexandra." Her voice was steady, but something seemed off. Up close, he could see the slight redness around her eyes, carefully concealed with makeup that couldn't quite hide the fact that she'd been crying recently. "It's nice to meet you," Jake said, suddenly acutely aware that he was wearing his one decent blazer over jeans while she looked like she'd stepped out of a corporate photo shoot. "Although, technically, we've already met. I work in the design department at Rivera Marketing." Alexandra's perfect posture stiffened further. "I wasn't aware of that connection when I agreed to this dinner." Her tone was professional, distant. "My sister Megan is friends with your cousin Sophia," Jake explained. I don't think either of them realized the workplace overlap. An uncomfortable silence settled between them as they ordered drinks. Jake struggled to reconcile this poised, somewhat cold woman with the rumors that circulated around the office, that the new CEO was a ruthless perfectionist who had already terminated 3 executives in her first month. The woman who had earned the nickname, the Glacier, for her cool demeanor and cutting decisions. Their small talk remained painfully formal until their meals arrived. As Jake recounted a humorous story about his daughter's school play, something unexpected happened. Alexandra's carefully constructed facade cracked. A tear slid down her cheek. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, quickly dabbing at her face with her napkin. "This is completely unprofessional." "We're not at work," Jake said gently. "Are you okay?" Alexandra looked up, her dark eyes swimming with emotion. For a second, she seemed ready to retreat back behind her professional wall, but instead, she took a deep breath. "No," she admitted. "I'm not okay. And I haven't been for a very long time." What she revealed next would change both their lives forever. "Today would have been my daughter's 8th birthday," Alexandra said, her voice barely audible over the restaurant's ambient noise. "She died 3 years ago from leukemia." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. His heart constricted painfully in his chest as he thought of his own Emily, safe at home with Mrs. Gonzalez, probably negotiating for extra dessert or one more bedtime story. "I'm so sorry," he said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. Alexandra nodded, composing herself with visible effort. "I don't talk about Lily. Not to anyone. The board doesn't know. My employees definitely don't know." She gave a bitter laugh. Can you imagine what they'd think if they knew the glacier had a heart after all? That she spends the 14th of every month visiting a small grave with a unicorn headstone? The revelation transformed everything Jake thought he knew about the intimidating woman who had taken over his company with such decisive authority. Behind the designer suits and strategic decisions was a mother with a wound so deep it seemed impossible to heal. "I understand if you want to end this evening now," Alexandra said formally, reaching for her purse. "I'm sure this isn't what you signed up for." Jake reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close enough to halt her movement. "My wife, ex-wife, left us when Emily was 4. Just packed up and decided that motherhood and marriage weren't for her after all. Every birthday, every Christmas, every school event, Emily looks for her in the crowd. She still asks when mommy is coming home." Alexandra's gaze met his, a flash of recognition passing between them, the understanding that only comes from sharing a specific kind of pain. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you keep going when half your heart is missing?" The question hung between them, raw and honest in a way that transcended their awkward beginning. Jake found himself answering with a truth he rarely acknowledged aloud. "Some days, I don't know. But then Emily will say something funny or draw me a picture or just smile in a certain way, and I remember that the other half of my heart is still beating, still needing me to be whole for her." Alexandra's tears flowed freely now, no longer hidden behind careful composure. "I don't have that. I lost all of my heart when I lost Lily." In that moment, Jake understood why his sister had arranged this particular match, not because they would make a perfect couple, but because they each carried wounds that might help the other heal. As the evening progressed, their conversation deepened. Alexandra spoke of her meteoric rise in the business world, driven partly by genuine talent but increasingly by the need to bury herself in work after Lily's death. Jake shared the challenges and joys of single fatherhood, the constant juggling act between providing for Emily and being present for her. "I probably shouldn't tell my boss this," Jake said with a small smile, "but I've missed 3 important meetings this month because of school events. The dragon lady in HR gave me a formal warning." Alexandra raised an eyebrow. "Dragon lady?" Jake winced. "Sorry. Office nickname, not mine." "And who am I in this office mythology?" Jake hesitated. "You might not want to know." "Oh, I definitely want to know now." "The glacier," he admitted. "Because you're cold, ruthless, unfeeling?" Alexandra supplied, a hint of genuine amusement breaking through her sadness. "Their words, not mine," Jake hurried to clarify. "Though after that meeting where you fired the entire project management team." "I didn't fire them for missing deadlines," Alexandra said quietly. "I fired them because they falsified safety reports on our clients' children's products to save costs. Something I discovered when one of those products gave a child 3rd-degree burns." Jake stared at her, seeing yet another layer to this complex woman. "No one knew that." "No one asked," she replied simply. "It was easier to believe I'm heartless." By the time dessert arrived, something had fundamentally shifted between them. The connection wasn't romantic, both were too raw, too wounded for that, but something equally powerful had formed, understanding. As they prepared to leave, Alexandra hesitated. "Jake, about your HR warning." "Don't worry about it," he said quickly. "I'm not asking for special treatment. It's not special treatment to accommodate a parent's need to be present for their child," she said firmly. "I'd like to implement a company-wide policy review. Would you be willing to consult on it? As someone actually in the trenches of balancing work and parenthood?" For the first time that evening, Jake saw a spark of purpose replace the profound sadness in her eyes. It was a small thing, but somehow it felt important, the beginning of something healing for them both. Their blind date ended with a simple handshake, but as Jake watched Alexandra walk to her car, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Sometimes the most important connections weren't about romance but about finding someone who truly saw you, all of you, including the broken parts. The following Monday, Jake arrived at work expecting awkwardness, but instead found a company-wide email announcing a new family-friendly policy task force. By Wednesday, he was leading a focus group of employee parents. By Friday, he found himself working late in a conference room with Alexandra, their professional relationship transformed by the personal truths they had shared. As weeks passed, their friendship deepened. Jake introduced Alexandra to Emily, who immediately enchanted the CEO with her boundless energy and creativity. Though Alexandra was initially hesitant around the child, Emily's simple acceptance broke through barriers that years of therapy hadn't touched. "You're sad like Daddy sometimes," Emily observed one Sunday when Alexandra joined them for an afternoon in the park. "But that's okay. Daddy says it's brave to feel your feelings." Alexandra looked at Jake with questioning eyes. "Emotional intelligence curriculum at her progressive school," he explained. "Sometimes I think she's raising me instead of the other way around." But Emily's innocent observation sparked something in Alexandra. The woman who had buried her grief in spreadsheets and strategic plans began to allow herself to remember Lily not just with pain but with love. And as she shared stories of her daughter with Jake and Emily, the sharp edges of her loss began to soften, not diminishing but transforming. For Jake, Alexandra's presence in their lives filled a different void. Here was someone who understood the weight of responsibility he carried, who saw his struggles not as weaknesses but as evidence of strength. When Emily had a fever and Jake had to miss an important client presentation, it was Alexandra who stepped in without judgment, who later brought soup and sat with them watching animated movies until Emily fell asleep. "You don't have to do this," Jake said as Alexandra helped clean up the kitchen that night. "I know," she replied simply. "I want to." Their relationship evolved organically, neither of them pushing for definitions or expectations. They were two wounded people helping each other navigate through pain towards something that felt increasingly like hope. The turning point came 6 months after their first meeting. Jake arrived at Alexandra's office for their weekly policy committee meeting to find her staring out the window, her usual focus absent. "Lily would have started 3rd grade today," she said without turning around. "I keep wondering what backpack she would have chosen, whether she would still love unicorns or if she'd have moved on to something else by now." Jake stood beside her, not touching but present. "I think we carry them as they would have been." Emily's mom missed seeing her lose her first tooth, take her first swim without floaties, learn to read. "Sometimes I'm angry she's missing it all, and sometimes I'm just sad that Emily doesn't have her there to witness these moments." Alexandra turned to him, her eyes clear despite her sadness. "I've been offered a position with an international firm. Triple the salary, offices in Paris and Tokyo." Jake felt a strange hollowness form in his chest. "That's incredible. Congratulations." "I'm not taking it," Alexandra said firmly. "Why not?" "It sounds like an amazing opportunity." "Because my life is here now," she said simply. "For the first time since Lily died, I'm building something that matters to me. The company is changing, becoming more human. And you and Emily." She paused. "You both helped me remember how to live again, not just exist." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. "We need you too," Jake said quietly. "More than I realized until just now." That evening, as they sat on Jake's small balcony after Emily had gone to bed, Alexandra reached for his hand. "I'm not fixed," she warned. "I'll always carry Lily with me. There will always be hard days." "I'm not asking for fixed," Jake replied, intertwining his fingers with hers. "None of us are. Emily will always wonder about her mother. I'll always wonder if I'm enough for her. We're all just doing our best with our broken pieces." Alexandra's smile was soft in the fading light. "Maybe that's what love really is. Not finding someone perfect, but finding someone whose broken edges align with yours. Is that what this is?" Jake asked, his heart racing. "Love? I think," Alexandra said carefully, "it's becoming that. If we let it. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, an acknowledgement of all they had shared and all they might yet become. Not a fairy tale ending, but something more valuable, a beginning built on truth. 1 year after their blind date, Jake and Alexandra stood together at Lily's grave. Emily placed a carefully crafted friendship bracelet next to the unicorn headstone. "I made it in her favorite colors," Emily explained. "You said she liked pink and purple best." Alexandra knelt beside her, tears flowing freely now. "She would have loved it. And she would have loved you too." Jake watched the two most important people in his life sharing this sacred moment and marveled at how pain and joy could exist so powerfully in the same heart. Their journey hadn't erased their losses or magically healed all wounds, but it had given them something profound, the courage to build a new family from the fragments of their broken ones. As the seasons changed and their relationship deepened, Jake and Alexandra navigated the complex terrain of blending their lives. The office initially buzzed with gossip when their relationship became public, but Alexandra's transformed leadership style had already begun shifting the company culture towards something more compassionate and authentic. Emily blossomed with Alexandra's presence in her life, though there were challenging moments too, nights when the little girl cried for the mother who had chosen to leave, days when Alexandra was overwhelmed by memories of Lily and needed space to grieve. But through it all, they learned to communicate honestly about their needs and fears. 2 years after that fateful blind date, Alexandra stood in the empty conference room long after the board meeting had ended. The company had just announced its most profitable quarter while also being named one of the country's best workplaces for parents. She traced her finger over a framed photograph on her desk, Lily in her hospital bed, smiling despite the tubes and monitors, a stuffed unicorn clutched in her thin arms. "I think you'd be proud," she whispered to the image of her daughter. "I'm trying to make the world a little better, like we always talked about." A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Jake stood in the doorway, Emily beside him holding a homemade card. "We thought we'd surprise you for lunch," he explained. To celebrate the announcement. Alexandra welcomed them with open arms, no longer the glacier but simply a woman who had learned that heartbreak didn't have to be the end of her story. That evening, as they walked along the riverfront, Jake stopped at a bench overlooking the water. "This is where I used to come when things felt impossible," he admitted. "After Sarah left, when I didn't know how I'd manage as a single dad, when work and life and everything felt too heavy." Alexandra squeezed his hand. "And now? Now I still come here, but not to escape. To remember how far we've come." He turned to face her. "Alexandra Rivera, you walked into that restaurant 2 years ago as my boss and a stranger. You walked out as someone who would change my life forever." He knelt before her, Emily watching with excited eyes from a few feet away. "We've both learned that life doesn't follow the plans we make, that loss and pain are unavoidable parts of loving deeply. But we've also learned that hearts can expand, that families can be built in unexpected ways, that second chances are possible even when they look nothing like what we imagined." He opened a small velvet box, revealing a simple ring with a marquise diamond flanked by 2 smaller birthstones, one for Emily, one for Lily. "I'm not asking you to forget the past or promise me a perfect future. I'm asking if you'll join our imperfect, real, beautiful life officially. Will you marry me?" Alexandra's hands trembled as she touched the ring, her eyes moving from Jake to Emily and back again. In that moment, she saw clearly the journey that had brought her from the darkest depths of grief to this unexpected joy. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." Emily rushed forward, wrapping her arms around them both. "Does this mean we're really going to be a family?" Alexandra knelt to the child's level. "We already are a family, sweetheart. This just makes it official." Their wedding 6 months later was small and meaningful, held in a garden where butterfly releases honored those who couldn't be physically present. Lily's empty chair, decorated with her favorite unicorn, sat beside Emily's in the front row. Alexandra carried a bouquet with Lily's favorite flowers woven among her own choices. As they exchanged vows, Jake and Alexandra each acknowledged the broken roads that had led them to each other, not as a tragic backstory but as an essential part of who they had become. They promised not perfection but presence, not endless happiness but enduring commitment through whatever joys and sorrows might come. 5 years after their blind date, they sat together on the porch of their new home, watching Emily and her younger brother Daniel play in the yard. Alexandra's hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, where their third child, a daughter, was growing. "I never imagined this," she confessed. "After Lily, I thought my heart was finished. Closed forever." Jake covered her hand with his. "That's the thing about hearts. They keep beating even when we think they're broken beyond repair." Their journey had taught them the most profound truth, that love doesn't require perfect people or perfect circumstances. It grows in the cracks of our broken places when we're brave enough to remain open despite our pain. Alexandra watched as Emily helped little Daniel, named for her late father, climb onto the swing. The girl who had once been so wounded by her mother's abandonment had blossomed into a compassionate big sister with a remarkably wise heart. And soon, she would welcome another sibling, a baby sister they planned to name Lillian, honoring the child who had taught Alexandra how to love unconditionally. "Sometimes I still can't believe we found each other," Jake said, his voice full of wonder. "That out of all the blind dates in all the restaurants in this city, I walked into yours." Alexandra leaned against his shoulder, thinking of the tears she had shed that night and all they had revealed. What had seemed like weakness had become the foundation of their strength together. "Some people might call it coincidence," she replied. "But I think maybe it was Lily, sending me exactly what my heart needed when I couldn't even admit I was still capable of needing anything." As the sun set on their ordinary, extraordinary life, Alexandra and Jake remained on the porch long after the children had gone inside. Two people who had once defined themselves by their losses now found themselves defined by what they had built together, a family formed not from perfect circumstances but from the courage to begin again, to risk loving after heartbreak, to believe that even the deepest wounds could become the spaces where the most beautiful light could enter. Their story wasn't about forgetting the past or magically healing all wounds. It was about finding someone who understood that grief and joy could coexist, that broken hearts could still beat strongly, and that sometimes the most powerful connections begin in our most vulnerable moments. If you've stayed with this story until now, perhaps you've recognized pieces of your own journey in Jake and Alexandra's. Maybe you too have wondered if heartbreak might be the end of your story, only to discover it was actually the beginning of a different one than you had planned. Remember that the most beautiful connections often happen when we're brave enough to let someone see our authentic selves, tears, fears, hopes and all. And if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded that second chances come in unexpected packages, and that even the most broken hearts can find their way back to joy. Because that's the thing about real love stories, they don't end with happily ever after. They continue through the messy, beautiful reality of everyday life, where the deepest connections are formed not despite our wounds, but because of them.